everyone, welcome to Poetry and Talk. Poetry and Talk is a new online interviewing platform for poets to share their poetry, background, and inspiration. We're so grateful that you're watching today. We have a new guest poet to introduce you to. We'd also like to invite you to our Facebook page, Poetry and Talk, and please check out some of the videos uploaded of poet interviews and be on the lookout for new poet interviews as well. On Poetry and Talk, we like to stay open to new ideas, new ways of seeing, new ways of perceiving. We honor each poet's journey, and we take an exploratory stance so that we can grow and evolve as poets and bring new and exciting and innovative energy into our creative projects and into our lives. Thank you again so much for watching. I'm Leslie Sue, host for Poetry and Talk, and I'd like to welcome our guest poet for today, Victoria Hyla Maldonado.
Yes. Hi.
Victoria, welcome. How are you?
Good. I'm good.
Good. Okay. We have a customary opening here with our poets. So if you'd like to give us a brief introduction to our poem and then read that, that would be wonderful.
Okay. All right. Well, my name is Victoria Hyla Maldonado, and I'm actually the editor of a poetry collection that I wanted to share with you today. The poet whose poetry it is, her name is Lisa F. Gullo, and unfortunately she has passed. This is being published posthumously for her, and she passed from suicide almost 2 years ago at this point. But she was a dear friend of mine, and this collection is my gift to her and her family as a legacy gift. We're in the suburbs or western suburbs of Chicago, and this poetry book of hers is 500 pages long, and it basically chronicles her journey from abuse to mental health struggles to life struggles and to faith. And it's kind of her story, her life story. So. And then I would like to start by reading a poem of hers that she wrote in December of 2017, about a year before she passed. And it is called When. And then from there I can help you understand her themes. So here's the poem, When. When do you know if your life has meaning? If anyone noticed that you were even breathing? When do you know if your life was worth it? If anyone noticed that you didn't quit? When do you know if your life touched another? If anyone noticed how much you were a lover? When do you know if your life came true? If anyone noticed you did what you were meant to? When do you know if your life was good enough? If anyone noticed that you grew up? When do you know if your life gave love? If anyone noticed how much you were thought of? When do you know if your life ceased? If anyone noticed you were finally at peace?
Okay, so this is a situation where you're not the poet, but you are a good friend of the poet.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, she committed suicide, and you very lovingly put together compilation of her poems, and you're going to share with us this journey, this whole story.
Yeah.
Okay, please.
Yeah, I knew her for about 2 years or three years before she passed. And when she passed, even though we kind of knew it was an eventuality because of what she was struggling with, it surprised us. It really surprised us. And after her funeral, I asked her husband, I said, I know Lisa wrote a lot of poetry, but she was never brave enough to share it with the world or to publish any of it. Can I have all the poetry, and can I do something with it? And he said, absolutely. And he gave me mountains and mountains of papers and a file drive with probably 500 poems on it. And I began to sift through it and try to figure it out. And luckily, most of what she had was dated either by just a year or by a year and a month, sometimes a year, month, and a day. And so as I was organizing it, it became a journal of her struggles in life. And just to give you a little bit of Lisa's background, she was sexually abused as a child of 10. And according to her in her poetry, she wasn't really supported by her mother and stepfather and step family. And this kind of, she pushed down and decided to repress it for a long time. When it finally resurfaced, probably 15 years after that, she began to go into severe depression. She dealt with that for probably another decade, in and out of that. And then in 2012, she began to have physical seizures, and they're called hemiplegic migraines, and they were migraines but with a seizure-like effect. So like half of her body would go paralyzed for several hours at a time. And so the depression coupled with the seizures, which made it unable for her to work any longer, that just sent her into this downward spiral of absolute depression. And she writes about all of that in her poetry. But then in 2015, she attempted suicide for the first time. I think it was March 2015. And she was in a coma for 10 days, I believe. And then she had a real and visceral encounter with Jesus Christ. And she writes about that in her poetry as well. And Jesus basically told her, you're not done. And you have a purpose in life and you need to be there. So she woke up out of this coma with a completely renewed vision of faith. And that from 2015 even up to when she finally committed suicide, her mentality and her perspective shifted, and you can see how faith did impact her. I met her through our church, and so I got to see the bulk of her faith journey from 2016 to 2018. And I worked closely with her in a volunteer organization. And I knew she wrote poetry, but I did not know to the extent it was. And I wasn't sure what I was going to get when I asked her husband for the poetry. I'm a writer myself, and I write long novels and things like that. And I've dabbled in poetry, but I haven't really published any myself. But when I got everything from him, I was just amazed and floored. The poetry she writes about is an epic journey of her struggles. And her themes go into goes from her abuse to her struggles with her physical ailments to the beauty of her love with her and her husband, the love she had for her children, also the separation emotionally of her and her husband, although they never physically were separated, and then also just the struggle with her physical problems, struggle both mentally and physically, and then her journey to faith. So all of those themes are super prevalent within her poetry, and it creates just an epic journey that we want to share with the world in this format. And all of the proceeds from all of the book sales are going back to her family. And that was one of her last wishes, was to create this legacy for her children and her husband. And the title of the anthology is called The Evidence I Have Lived, which is actually thematically based on the poem that I shared earlier. And that title came from another piece of writing that I found from her, and I felt like that snippet I found was speaking to me, and that became the title of the anthology. And for her, writing poetry was therapy. It was therapeutic. She didn't want to be a burden on anyone, and so she rarely shared any of her struggles with anybody except her most immediate family. And so a lot of us just saw this strong woman who was being amazing through all of her physical struggles. That's who we knew. She was vibrant, she was giving, she was loving. We did not know how much she was struggling. And I wrote the introduction to this anthology and organized it. And in the introduction, I explain a lot of that experience that we had with her. And she talks about how and why she wrote her poetry. For her, and she even says, why would anyone want to read any of this? And she's wrong. Everyone should read this. So, but she doesn't use super flowery language or even very what you would necessarily say poetic. And if you take it in isolated bits, maybe it's not, poet laureate material by itself, but the emotion and the purpose and the inspiration behind her subjects and her topics is just heartbreaking, but it's also uplifting, it's inspirational. I mean, she speaks to other people struggling with depression and suicide, and kind of tells them they're not alone and that there is a way through it, largely with faith. But yeah, so it's just an epic journal of her life that I was able to help her piece together. Like the first 3/4 of the poetry anthology are chronological because they had dates on the poems. But then there's a section that she didn't date, and they're set aside by themes, and those themes that I kind of talked about. So that's the gist of the poetry book.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're so glad that you're on here and that you're sharing Lisa's story. And I have a couple of questions for you, Victoria. Sure. Okay, the poetry that she was writing, this was a great release for her, and whatnot, as you expressed. So nobody read these poems as she was writing them. She was really just kind of writing them for herself. Does that include her husband and her children?
Once in a while, she would share things with her husband, and when she was with us in church, she shared a few. I'm saying like maybe 3 of them. Some of the more positive, more faith-based poems with us. Some of her close church friends, but for the bulk of it, nobody got to see any of this while she was alive. Mm-hmm. And she wrote some poems to her children and many poems to her husband, and they never even saw them until now. So.
Mm-hmm. And I think you touched upon this, but could you reiterate, Victoria, that you met her in 2015 through your church, and she was going through an experience that she had with an encounter with Jesus Christ, and she was renewing her faith and exploring this. So how did you find out that she had this poetry?
Okay, yeah. So so she had the first suicide attempt in March 2015. I first met her, I believe, in September or October of that year, but I didn't really get to know her until January of 2016. We were in a volunteer program with our church called Alpha, and Alpha is a place where people can go to ask questions about faith and about life and just about the big questions in life in general. And I was involved in that program. And so we met through there. And honestly, I didn't know much or anything about her poetry until maybe 17, when she really felt comfortable kind of sharing a little bit with us. And she didn't want to appear weak. She wanted to appear strong in everything she did. But when she was with us in that Alpha program, we had a weekend away with our guests, and we provided food every week to everybody. And she was one of the biggest providers of food and just helping out. And on one of those weekends away, she had one of those seizures that I was talking about, the hemiplegic migraine seizures that basically make half your body go paralyzed. And so we were with her during that, and we asked her to open up more, but she never really would. And so I just knew she was a poet, and then but I didn't know to what extent. I mean, it's like an iceberg where you see the teeny top above the water, but then there's this massive mass under the water that you had no idea was there. And so I got to see that little teeny ice cap at the top when I knew her. So.
Right. So it's kind of like you saw a certain presentation of her that she wanted to present, and yet there was all this things going on inside of her that at least now we get to know about through her poetry.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And since the book has been out, which has been how long?
Well, I just I published it online in last month in October, and it is coming. I mean, it's being printed right now at the publisher, so it's very, very new. I wanted to make sure it was out for the 2-year anniversary of her death. And I mean, I'm taking pre-orders for the physical book copies right now, and they'll be out before Christmas. So, I've had several people read it. The pastor of our church read it. I've had a friend of mine who's a psychologist read it, and everyone just speaks of the just emotional impact that this poetry has on people. And especially, I mean, like 100% if you knew her, but even if you didn't know her, if you've ever been, your life has gone through any experience with anyone dealing with suicide or depression, this is just a beacon in that darkness of confusion. And since she was only writing for herself, essentially, but in her first suicide note, she wrote about wanting her family to read everything. So this is fully in line with her wishes. But she just never shared anything at all. And so it's just neat that we can see this
Mhm.
part of her.
Mhm. And it seems like you really know her exceptionally well, not just from the time she was here, but through the whole unraveling of her poetry and, getting to know her on a deeper level through her writings.
Yeah, I mean, I did know her in life, and I consider her one of my close friends. But I honestly, once I read the poetry, I realized how much I did not know her. And that is both humbling and just inspirational that she deliberately kept all of this from everyone she could. She did not want to be a burden on anyone else. And I mean, we could have told her till we were blue in the face that she wasn't being a burden, but she had it kind of in her head that no one wanted to deal with all of the trauma she was going through. And we always have those thoughts, well, we wish we could have done more, but she deliberately kept this from us. But she did want to show the world. She was just so scared that it wouldn't be a valid, people wouldn't appreciate it or have it be validated. But I can tell you, I've read through this probably 10 times now from my different editing permutations and organizations, and it is a beautiful compilation and collection, and just so amazing what
Mhm.
she's done, her life's work. So
Mhm. Yes, it sounds amazing. I have a question, Victoria. You chose When, Lisa's poem that
mhm.
you opened up with. Why did you select that one?
Well, I because when I found the little snippets of her unfinished ideas, I placed these quotes with poems in the anthology. I didn't want to discount them; they were still Lisa's work, and I went and searched for that quote again, and it was put with this poem. And so this one kind of reflects the entire title. And in that sense, I mean, it goes through all of her different struggles. It goes through her doubts and questions about love. It goes through her questions about effort and did she do enough, if she even exists. Will people even notice that she died? Will people even notice that she was here? I mean, it's all those doubts that go through, the themes go through the entire anthology. And it's her constant questioning of, does she have worth as a person? And that's kind of what depression does to you a lot. I mean, in a lot of depression is all kinds of forms, but for her it was just a complete self-doubt and complete in life, in love, in meaning, in effort. And I felt like the poem, after I read through it and searched for it, I felt that it really touched on all the themes that go throughout the anthology.
Mhm. Mhm. Would you mind, you'd be kind enough to read another one of the poems in her
I
book?
can see if I can find one. Yes. I have it pulled up. I just need to go through. And one really interesting thing while I'm looking for something is that she put artwork with her poems. And so, but a lot of the artwork she used was just kind of Photoshop artwork and that kind of thing. But it was, we couldn't use a lot of the poetry or the artwork that she had, so I put a call out to a bunch of artists. Some of them I knew, some of them I didn't, and I asked for artists to contribute art to the poetry book. And so I got so many submissions from so many different artists who just gave freely of their work to go along with the poems. So a lot of poems are like the poem, and then there will be an art piece that illustrates the theme a little bit, which I think is a cool feature. So it's not just the poetry, it's also art. So
Mhm.
here is one just at random. It's from July 2018, which was you know, what's 5 months before she passed. So this one is called Sorry. So it says, sorry, I am not strong. Sorry, I sway in the storm. Sorry, I have no direction. Sorry, my words do not warm. I want to float downstream, feel nothing but the current that takes me far away, content for another day. I wish I had the strength to believe in all things good. I wish I had the words to become what I wish I could. Each day is like the last, tormented and ashamed, because in the end, I know I'm just playing the game. So that one kind of plays to more of her darker thoughts about herself. So,
Mm-hmm. This whole project is really quite moving and quite touching, and that's really amazing that you put this together and taken all the time to compile it and share Lisa's story and kind of honor her last wishes. It sounds like, based on these two poems, we have a pretty clear understanding of what was going on, and in her poetry, she's realer than real. Particularly that one, we really get a sense of what she was experiencing, what she was going through.
mm-hmm. Yeah, one word I would describe her poetry is as authentic. So, I mean, because she literally, I've said it, but she was writing for herself. She was writing to understand her own emotions and thoughts and feelings, and feeling like she was isolated, even though she was surrounded by her family. She has 2 kids. They're now both in college. But yeah, she just felt completely alone. And so the authenticity of this, she's not putting this out to be poetic. She's not putting this out for a particular effect. She's writing all of this to understand what's going on in herself, and try to explain to her, even to herself, what she was feeling.
Mm-hmm. And Victoria, would you touch upon starting at 2015, 2016, when you met her and she was going through a renewal of faith, and you mentioned that she had an experience with Jesus Christ. Would you be able to, since these were the years that you knew her, how did her faith change her, and anything that you can share about that, please?
Yeah, no, her faith was a huge turnaround, and you can see it in her poetry, so anyone can really access it. But her poetry before her suicide attempt was very depressive and very dark and very fatalistic. But the poetry that occurred, after that, it still has that depressive bent, but it also has this intense beacon of hope behind it, because she really, truly, viscerally had an encounter. And she described it in her baptismal testimony. And it's basically just a perspective shift, a complete perspective shift. Because she went through this Alpha program in fall of 2015. But then she didn't really get baptized until, I believe, the following year. It was like the following fall. And I remember her when she was new to faith. She was coming to volunteer with the Alpha program. That's how I met her. And then she was like, well, can I do that? Is this okay? And she was still very doubtful in her faith, but she had that real and true personal connection that, people who are Christ followers want to achieve. So she really felt like God was actually listening to her, and God was there, and she had a purpose and a point in her existence. And that was the biggest shift. And honestly, that positivity and that hope really is a huge effect. And that's why it was kind of startling to us that she still went through with suicide, because we didn't understand, like, well, you seem to be doing better, you seem to be awesome, you seem to have this great connection with the community and with Christ. And so it was very confusing to us. But after she died, we also learned that she had been diagnosed with multiple personality disorders. And in the introduction that I wrote, because in her files I found a list, and she actually listed out her multiple personalities by name and by age and by kind of personality type.
Mm-hmm.
So she was just plagued by all these things inside her head that she just couldn't get away from. But I want this book to be that impact that shows that she did have a purpose in this world, and it was a great one.
Mm-hmm. And that's beautiful, that how you're bringing her purpose to life through this book. I do have a few other questions, Victoria. the span of her poetry was how many years, and how many years does the book cover?
The book covers all of it. She basically started writing back in high school, and I'd have to look it up for certain, but I believe it was like here I have it very quickly. It was she was born in 1967, and she started writing. Give me one half a second. She started writing and keeping poems from 1983. And the collection, there's very few between 1983 and 2011, and then after that point she just becomes this prolific writer. So I mean there's maybe 20 to 25 between 1983 and 2011, but then in 2012 was when her seizures started, and that's when she started just being epic and prolific, and there's probably 100 poems just in 2012 alone. So yeah, it just from 2012 to 2018 was just the most prolific writing period for her, because that was the most struggle she was going through, dealing with the physical ailments plus the resurgence and memories of her child abuse. And there are a few poems about that abuse, and they're very graphic, but I did not feel like I could censor that at all, because it was so pivotal to why she went through what she went through.
Mhm. Victoria, we still have a few moments left. What else from Lisa's journey that you haven't touched upon would you like to share with us?
Well, there's few appendixes that are in the back that are really important. And one of them is when she died, like a few of us that knew her well put like a reach out on social media to people that knew Lisa, and we asked them to write letters to her or to her family after her death. I've included those letters in this book, and with the permission of the people who wrote them. And there are probably, I don't know, 7 or 8 letters. Some of them are to her husband and her children. Some of them are to her after she died. And just to show the impact that she personally had on so many people. And I felt it was important to include those. And it's just an appendix called Letters to Lisa. And to show that she was truly loved. And there's a small prose section before the poetry that has the beginnings of works that she begun to write. She wanted to write this into a book, so there's the beginning of her book. It's maybe a page that she she didn't get very far on that, but then her faith testimony is also in that prose section. And then another appendix that's on there is, I found this file of these quotes from poetry pieces and quotes from other people, and I couldn't put them in her work because they weren't her work, but she attributed to who they came from. And so it's an appendix of quotes that were meaningful to her and inspired her. And so I felt that was interesting to kind of know where her thought process came from.
Mhm.
And then there's also a very short appendix on mental health resources that my psychologist friend Lauren Harris put together for us for the book. So there's a
Mhm.
lot more than just the poetry and the artwork and her quotes, and there's just so much in here that really creates the full picture of who she was and how impactful she was to us.
Yes, absolutely. And it sounds amazingly comprehensive. I think there's been no stone unturned, and
I hope not.
thanks for that. We're going to need to wrap things up. What kind of closing comments would you like to leave with us, Victoria? And thank you for honoring her life and sharing this with us. And then also, if you could provide, please, how we can get a hold of this book,
Sure.
and if there's any social media connections.
Absolutely. So yeah, I just think that this, like I've said previously, the book is a wonderful emotional impacting piece. And I mean, it could go to psychology departments and they could study it and try to learn the internal workings of the specific mental health issues she was going through. Um, but really, anybody who's been touched by suicide in any way, shape, or form, I think this would maybe put the peace of mind to somebody who's touching that. So, and just the artists that contributed, they contributed not really knowing what they were contributing to, but I sent them the poems with their artwork, and to a person everyone was just, oh my god, that's so amazing that is what she was thinking. And so I really think that anybody that wants to feel that emotional pull and connection with someone else, this would be a great book. It is an ebook online on Amazon right now, and it's called The Evidence I Have Lived, and it's by Lisa F. Gullo. And it's being put into print right now, and so I can provide you, Leslie, later with the URL for that ordering form, and it will be available on Amazon and also through the publisher by the end of the year. Absolutely. And to connect further, if you have more questions about it, if anybody has more questions, my website is www.victoriajhyla.com. It's Hyla. And from there you can order a book, or you can reach out to me and ask more questions about Lisa, about her life, about the process. I'd love to field any kinds of questions that anyone has. I feel like anybody who reads this will be changed for the better, and that is something Lisa never thought she could have but always wanted, and she speaks about that in several of her poems. So I'm really happy to be a small part of that journey and to help her out, and I want this to be her legacy and also help the family, because she had crippling medical bills that the family are still dealing with, and we'd like to be able to support that and kind of defer those costs for them through this project.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Victoria, for your generosity of heart and your time and your work into this book, and you know, honoring Lisa's life in this way and the legacy that she wanted to leave, and for you taking the action so that we can all know about that and honor Lisa as well. So thank you so much. It's been very touching and very moving, and we appreciate you being our guest for today. And we'll be on.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. We'll include the link in the post as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Victoria. Thank you, everybody, for watching Poetry and Talk today. We're so grateful to you. We appreciate your support. Please stay connected with us on our Facebook page, Poetry and Talk, and we'll talk soon on the next Poetry and Talk. Until then, stay well and be blessed. Thank you again, Victoria. Thank you, everybody, for watching. We'll talk soon.